This episode of the podcast is sponsored anonymously by a listener in honor of the Reise Chabura in BMG currently learning Maseches Pesachim, and in recognition of this podcast, which not only introduced the listener to the margins of Jewish history, Shlomo Molcho and Rebbe Ben Moshe, amongst others, but importantly acquainted him with well-known but not well-understood figures like the Mordechai and the Rashbam, and is sponsored in appreciation of his wife, who encourages him to continue learning. If anyone would like to sponsor an episode or to support the show, there's a link, as always, through the website, and I'll put in the show's notes, and where you can email me, svarimchatter@gmail.com, as well as if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, you can email me as well. Additionally, if you're listening on Apple, if you can subscribe, rate, and review, especially if you can rate and review it, it's very much appreciated. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by R Moshe Hubner, who is a Rebbe at Hafter and is Mechaber of a number of Svarim, including what we'll be discussing on this episode, which is the Minchas Chinuch on Pesach. In English, the first volume came out last year, which was on Mitzvas Matzah and Sipur Yesias Mitzrayim, and the new volume this year is about Chametz, some about Chametz, and Shechianu. So thank you, Rebbe Hubner, for joining me.
I want to thank you. I just want to clarify just off the bat. We're automatically compatible. You spend enough time in yeshiva. This is my last year was my first volume on Pesach, which covered 2 of the mitzvahs of Pesach, as you said correctly. And this year we'll cover 7 mitzvahs of Pesach. Chametz encompasses 6, and the Shechianu. But previously, I had put out an original one, a little bit of a different style on Milah, on circumcision. Did that mitzvah as well. I did that originally. I used it as a hope for a segula, and Baruch Hashem, I had a boy, and I put it out my boy was in the hospital for a couple of months. It was born early, not for this podcast, a different time. And Baruch Hashem, at the bris, I put out a soft cover volume, and then later on I made a hard cover, and that was done very well, and it was the launching for how to change things up a little bit for the Pesach volumes.
Okay.
And it went, and I think I'm getting positive feedback.
Okay, so let's start off. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
Okay. I went to Torah Tamima High School, then I went to Shara Torah Bar Abzal Gepstein, then I went off to Eretz Yisrael. I was the only American in the yeshiva of 160 Israelis, Aral Chanan, great 3 years, then came back and went to Lakewood for a couple of years, and then got married, was there a couple of years more, then moved back to New York. I live in the same house as my parents. That's an odd thing, and I learned with my father. It's going back 40, 50 years already, but clearly the Minchas Chinuch, every day we do it. As you'll tell the audience, we are descendants of the Minchas Chinuch from my father's side, and we, Baruch Hashem, been zeicher to learn a lot together and accomplish, and it should continue until 120.
So you say you're a descendant of the Minchas Chinuch, and you talk about in the Sefer. We'll talk about that. But I've had on different guests, and I know people that are a descendant of this Sefer and that Mechaber, but some of them become interested in the Svarim. How did you become interested in the Minchas Chinuch? When did you start learning it, and then you decided you're going to do it in English?
Right. So as probably most Mechabrim tell you, whatever the original plan is, it takes off into something else. That I've seen in every one of my many volumes that I put out, what it appeared to look like in my dream. And then when it came out, physicality was very vastly different. And, Hashem's guiding the light there. And Baruch Hashem, we originally, the Minchas Chinuch doesn't need my introduction, doesn't need my thing. As everyone knows, it's on the Mizrach Vant of every shul in the world, probably. It's there. It's been published originally 1869 officially, and then by 1912 already every sefer in the world is probably quoting it. And it's been incredible. And the Machon Shleim did a few years ago. They updated it for 3 volumes. Now they're doing it to 8 volumes. And it's really the basic, as a friend of mine, I think he told me, I'm not going to quote his name, Rabbi Eliezer Brat, told me that it's the father of all umdus. I mean, it's enjoyable to know and to appreciate. So I think part of it began just as without thinking of actually turning it into volumes. It was just the enjoyment of learning it. You figure if you get through all 613 mitzvahs and you know all of his lumdus, you're already way ahead of the game without learning anything else. So we were learning other things. And then we started second Seder. Second Seder, we started, let's just do Minchas Chinuch piece by piece. My father is a very knowledgeable person, so he already had most of the background. So when I'm starting first word, he will tell me, there's a Gemara, there's a Rashi, there's a Mishnah Melech, there's this and that, like Yehuda. And then we get to the Minchas Chinuch who's adding to that, and it was just very, very enjoyable. I think originally I was just writing down the basic Minchas Chinuchs with a few wild ideas and maybe a few of my own Chedushim. I was not thinking it would turn into what it did today, but Hashem's guiding us, and Baruch Hashem, I'm very happy. It turned into what it turned into.
So, although people are maybe familiar with the Minchas Chinuch, maybe not. There's something you do at the beginning. You have a chapter, a glimpse at the history of the Minchas Chinuch. Again, this is in the volume on Matzah and Seasons Shrine. So last year's volume
Right.
on the first volume on Pesach. And this, I think, is written by your father. A bit of a background, a bit of a biography. You want to talk about that a little bit before we get into the Teichen of the Sefer, the Mitzvahs?
Right. So it's fascinating to have we're officially my father is Galtiana. So Ramea Lublina has a very famous quote. He says that he thanks the Ganovim in Poland because if not for them, the yeshiva system wouldn't have survived so well. I mean, the background, there's two different versions, maybe more than that by now, of what exactly he meant. But the yeshivas existed in the cities. People came, the Bachram came from the Shmol Shtetl. There was no dormitories in the old days. And where were you going to house these people? So either you found, a base measures with a bench on it, you got lucky, or what they did in some of the biggest cities like Varsha and stuff like that, what they did was the store owners, they would put the Bachram inside the store to guard it at night from Ganovim, and they would give them a place to sleep. It didn't have a bathroom always, and God forbid there was a fire, they wouldn't have got out, they would have been very dangerous. But Ramesh Pir family said, we have to thank the Ganovim, because as long as the thieves are still around and doing their jobs of thieving, then the Yeshiva Bachram will have a place to sleep inside the stores. And the segue to the Minchas Chinuch here, it's one of the great thefts of all time. I mean, the Minchas Chinuch had many, many, many volumes of Sfarim in manuscript form, and he was being pushed to publish it. It was knowledgeable by a lot of the Gedolim. They seem to quote it. The Dikduke Seifrim says he saw it at one point, and the Minchas Chinuch had no plans on printing it whatsoever. And then he had a robbery in his house. That itself lends itself to a lot of conspiracy theories. Galtianas have conspiracy theories. And he writes in the Akdama, not him, the one who published it, his Talmud, Rabbi Rappaport, writes that if not for the Geneva, he would not have done this. And this pushed him into it. And, we say, thankfully for the thieves, that was like probably the greatest theft for Klal Yisrael. I mean, I don't want to get into Yaakov and Esav here, but probably one of the greatest thefts in Klal Yisrael history is some person or people, I don't even know, went into his house, stole his manuscripts, and that produced the Minchas Chinuch, which again, as we said a few minutes ago, no proper sefer today is not quoting a Minchas Chinuch. It's just nearly impossible. Changed the world. So in the beginning, we decided to put out a little bit of a historical background to the sefer, to say, our theory on why he wrote it on the Chinuch. Really, as anyone who knows, the Minchas Chinuch is not based really on the Chinuch. I mean, he's using the Chinuch as a broad spectrum for what he's doing. So we gave a theory why he chose the Sefer HaChinuch necessarily, and just the background to the Sefer itself, the history of who he was. I mean, he was known as the Shaskin. He barely ever spoke, according to the legend. Very little, for the value of the Sefer, for the value of the human, there's very little known about the Mechaber himself. Very quiet, very unassuming, stayed under the radar. And it became the Sefer took over, and we figured we'll introduce the audience to the history of it, and then, of course, our familiar, descendants, how we get specifically to the Minchas Chinuch. And Baruch Hashem, the Minchas Chinuch, that theft changed Klal Yisrael literally forever. Nothing to say about that. Forever, and we hope we could find that theft somewhere, and then produce the manuscripts of more volumes. I think the Chonshlein put out something on the Cheshem Mishpat. They found something, but the Minchas Chinuch again is a classic. No way around it.
So his name was Rabbi Yosef Babad. I don't know if we said that. And like you said, you have a bit of a background over here. In the background, you even have some footnotes on this chapter. Now, you said something. You said how he wrote it on the Chinuch, and so it's Minchas Chinuch, but it's not really. It's kind of loosely associated. So, if you could just explain to the listeners, for those who may not be familiar, especially what exactly the style of the Minchas Chinuch. The Chinuch is on Mitzvahs. Explain the just basic the Chinuch and the Minchas Chinuch. Just give an overview of what the Sefer does.
Very good. So the Sefer HaChinuch himself was anonymously published as well as Minchas Chinuch first volume. I would say the first volume of Minchas Chinuch was loosely anonymous because a lot of people at the time knew who it was. It didn't have his name on the front, but I think a lot of people locally for sure all knew. The Sefer HaChinuch was an original anonymous print. A person wrote it for his son, just for the basics of the mitzvahs. I'm going to talk about bare bones basics. To house, when is it lie? Not every mitzvah applies all the time. Not every mitzvah is for women. Some mitzvahs are only kahanim. Some mitzvahs are only for a king. And he would do the basics of when are people obligated in this mitzvah, who is obligated in the mitzvah, and stuff like that. Very, very basic. The Minchas Chinuch used that sefer. And he decided, okay, I'm going to take each of the 613 mitzvahs and broadly bring out basic concepts. First, he'll add to what the Chinuch did. So the Chinuch will discuss if women are obligated, if slaves are obligated. The Minchas Chinuch has created these very interesting personalities: a half Jew, a half non-Jew, a half Kohen, a half Yisrael, and he had all of these basic stuff extended, and he would go through all the weird scenarios and the fundamentals. It became like a fundamental of all the mitzvahs. So when you're covering it, as they say, not a lot of from on kachim in the old days. The Minchas covered kachim because a lot of the 613 mitzvahs are covered in kachim. And he would do each mitzvah. He would do the fundamentals behind it. He would have very unique questions that would create oddball, practical differences in law. And I think because of that, it became very, very, very well known. They claim that, there's many legends about it. Early on, when the Sefer was printed and it wasn't so world, out there yet, because printing presses were limited in the 19th century, the people who had got the Sefer were stealing the material and using it for their own lectures, and they came out very smart. I actually, in my years of reviewing Svarim, I think I came up with at least one Sefer that, in my conspiratorial view, I'm not going to mention it here, but I think that was stolen. Many of the stuff from the Minchas Chinuch, he never quotes it once, and there's literally 70% of it is questions of the Minchas Chinuch. It could be random, but there are legends like that people did steal his ideas, because again, they're very broad-minded. The Minchas Chinuch himself understood that. He wrote in his letter that he wasn't there for attention. He's just starting a conversation. Every Minchas Chinuch, every paragraph in the Minchas Chinuch, I do it on this day for coming up this year on the Bracha Shachianu. It's only one paragraph in Mitzvah Shin. I've turned it into, and that's not the end of it, I've turned it into, I think, 35 pages in English. And that's one paragraph. Every paragraph in the Minchas Chinuch, based on the background knowledge and the future knowledge, who's discussing it, becomes endless amounts of Torah, just based on his unique questions and his unique fundamental ideas.
Okay, so I want to get into the Sefer in a minute, but first, I want to ask you just about this not Sefer, Svarim of yours on you said mention Milan and the 2 volumes on Pesach. You translate it to English, but as you just said, you took one paragraph, turned it into many pages. So is it an exact translation? What exactly did you do?
Excellent question. It's definitely not a translation. Definitely not. What it is let's say the Minchas Chinuch will have a question. So I would break it down for the audience and get to the background information. The average reader might not have the time, might not have the ability, depends on the level they're at, to actually research the Gemara, the Tosfos, the Rishonim, the Neid Yehuda, Mishnah that he's about to begin on line 3. Before the first 2.5 lines, you're ready to know a lot of information. So I went through the background information. Then I would take the actual statement, question, Claire, underlying principle the Minchas Chinuch comes up with, and then I would quote some of his differences he came up with, and then hopefully research and found a lot of other people who discuss it. So that's a one paragraph in the Minchas Chinuch. You'll have the background information, which could be 3-4 pages sometimes, and the people that discuss the Minchas Chinuch can add another 10 pages sometimes, because really, again, every paragraph is just endless. Every Clary has it. For example, in the new one this year on Tashbisu, the Minchas Chinuch has a very famous question. Again, there's a lot of famous questions in the Minchas Chinuch. His question is the mitzvah of eliminating chametz, the English word they use in article, eliminating chametz, is that a mitzvah of an active mitzvah or a passive mitzvah? Meaning, do you have to become chametz free? At the end of the day, you just have to not have chametz in your house, or do you have to actively destroy chametz? His famous difference is if someone was on an Atkins diet, my quotes, he didn't use the Atkins diet, obviously. Someone on the Atkins diet for 4 months has no at all carbs in his house. Would he have to go out on Erev Pesach and purchase chametz then necessarily to destroy it to fill the mitzvah? Of course, he's not violating any averis. He does not have any chametz within his house. But would he be obligated to actively purchase to actively fulfill the mitzvah? And the Minchas Chinuch himself, let's say, will come up with 4 or 5 practical differences in law if it's an active or a passive mitzvah. And I've researched and found I came up with not my own. We come up with about 12 in this volume of differences in law, again based on his original fundamental question, his original 4 or 5 differences, and within each difference he has, by the way, there are those who argue on the difference. So on the first difference right away that he comes up with, there's already a Rav Gifter and a Rav Diskin. They're already disagreeing with if he's even correct in what he's saying. So just taking any paragraph of the Minchas Chinuch really stretches out to endless amounts of Torah can be created, which is something he wrote. He discussed the fact that he didn't feel the need to defend himself. As long as he's creating Torah, he's good, and he has successfully accomplished creating Torah, and hopefully my English, again, based on, I would say the same way the Minchas Chinuch based his 3 volumes on the Sefer HaChinuch, which is really loosely based. I think I based my version of his Minchas Chinuch on the Minchas Chinuch as well, loosely based.
So it's some sort of adaptation and expansion, basically, of the Minchas Chinuch is what it is. So why do this in English? I mean, basically, what you're saying is you could have done the same thing in Hebrew as well.
Absolutely. I've had some I was on the phone to Rosh Yeshiva of mine a few days ago, and he told me he's waiting for the Hebrew version. It definitely could be done in Hebrew. There's a lot of merit to be saying that. Me personally, I felt that the English audience is huge out there. There is and they don't have access to the lumdis, but they do enjoy it. I mean, I'll give a shout out. I don't know him personally. The Raid Bites, I forgot his name right now while I'm speaking, and the art school has created these things. People want the intent, the deep learning of what's going on in lumdis, but it's not accessible, not available so much. I don't think there's many from I would venture less than 5 out there that are doing what I'm doing. Lumdis in English for the English speaking crowd, and it has everything there. Could it have done a Hebrew volume? Absolutely. There's no question that this could have been, I don't know how much of the English speaking audience needs my Likud of the Minchas Chinuch. There are already 45 other volumes on it, but yes, could have been done in Hebrew. But I think the English audience is looking for something like this if they know about it. There's nothing similar. I've had a bunch of friends of mine who are my Gita Shurim sat in color for a while, and that's what they told me. They told me they pick it up, they can't put it down the way it's written, the style. I try to break it up a lot, and they find that these are things they wouldn't have thought about, wouldn't have known about, and it's good for them. It's they get the lumdis without doing it, without doing the effort. It's not an easy read to ruin my sales. It's not something you pick up like a book. It's a very slow, methodical read. There's a lot of information there because it's lumdis in English. But when someone is concentrating, the feedback has been extremely positive that they're really enjoying it. They feel like they're entering the world they would not have got to otherwise. And Baruch Hashem, that's but yes, I could have done it in Hebrew. Maybe eventually I will.
Great bye to Shirley Borenstein. So shout out to Shirley who sponsored a recent episode of the podcast. Okay, so let's jump into Mrs. Matzah. So you first start off the makar, the source of the mitzvah, and then various different things. I'm just gonna read some before I turn it over to you. But there's timing,
not a problem at all.
eating matzah time frame, eating gemara time frame. You have default time for eating matzah, one shot with asachas, eating matzah with kedarach achila, which is normal matter. Digestion, ben hashinayim, matzah between the teeth. There's again one mitzvah being mevatel another mitzvah, so nullifying another again, and on and on and on. There's a lot here. We'll pick and choose some portions to discuss, and then the rest listeners can check out the sefer. But let's start off all at the beginning from the makar of the mitzvah's matzah, the source, and then you can pick whatever you want to pick to start. We can discuss some stuff.
Right. So in general, that's how the Minchas Chinuch starts. He'll always start with like where to look up. He starts really, we look up in the Gemaras and the Rambam and stuff like that. It happens to be that it's an interesting thing in most mitzvahs. It becomes a debate of where the makar for the mitzvah becomes as well. It's a fascinating idea. Like I just was working on the first chinuch in Pru Revu. I'm writing up for a future volume. But like where's the makar for the mitzvah Pru Revu? Every one of the mitzvahs, you have to just start with the bare minimum basics. And that's what the Sefer HaChinuch starts with sometimes. He'll quote a pasuk and stuff like that. The Minchas Chinuch will analyze, does everyone agree with this assumption? And again, it begins the conversation of different people believing in different things, and it becomes endless. Every single one of these things. The second paragraph you mentioned, there was a wild one. We all know, I think it's everyone's table on the Seder night. They sit around discussing the time frame. We all know that there's something called Kedei Achilas Pras. Whatever, we'll assume for this conversation it's 3 minutes. That in order, you don't have to actually eat a full kazayas in one shot. You could eat it and nibble it over the course of 3 minutes, and whatever's combined within 3 minutes counts as one eating. So everyone takes out their stop clock because they want to make sure, not on Yom Tov obviously, but they're trying to figure out to eat the entire kazayas in one shot. The Minchas Chinuch says it as a basic idea that of course there is a Kedei Achilas Pras. Here is one of those times where I launched from the Minchas Chinuch statement, a very bare minimum statement of the Minchas Chinuch, that Kedei Achilas Pras is necessary, and I show that it's not so necessary by positive commandments. There's a Ragad Shava, there's a Mutzim Eish that seems to say that the concept of needing a time frame is only by prohibitions. Eating pig has to be eaten within 3 minutes, but eating matzah you'd be able to eat the whole night. So really, it's like an interesting idea. I have some unique, interesting ideas based on the Minchas Chinuch. Again, he didn't actually discuss that one specifically. He only says that, of course, the Kedei Achilas time frame, eat the kazayas within 3 minutes. And I say, by the way, that statement of the Minchas Chinuch, there's a lot to discuss. It's not necessarily clear that you'd need a 3 minute time frame for matzah. You might have the whole night, which some shockingly rule, but you have the whole night. The Machna Chaim learns that someone can eat one kazayas nibble it over the course of 12 hours, depending on the night is, of Seder night, and he has fulfilled the obligation. Mind-boggling. And it's not something you know about. Again, so I used the Minchas Chinuch as a springboard, but it was based on his line that, by the way, Kedei Achilas Pras is necessary. So that's what I did over there. And Baruch Hashem, again, every one of the ideas, most of it was trying to base it on a line of the Minchas Chinuch. It wasn't random, but I took a line of his. If there was others who debated, I would bring it down.
Now, there are some things you even extrapolate out, like you said. Maybe you want to talk about how the Minchas Chinuch says matzah needs taste, and therefore you decided you went to man. You talk about the man from that,
right. So the Minchas Chinuch has a wild. I don't know if it's very questionable, but he says that matzah to fulfill the mitzvah requires what's called tam matzah, the taste of matzah, and he wants to use that as a very serious he has a very serious paragraph about how much of when matzah gets mixed into other items, can you nullify the matzah or not? And he comes out that, let's say, cooked matzah, which is missing the taste of matzah, if you would have 90% matzah and 10% cooked matzah, you would not be able to fill a kazayis, 90% of one kazayis. Why? Because the cooked matzah is missing this concept of called taste of matzah, which he created. So yes, I took that as a springboard to say, wait a second, if taste of matzah is the most important element in fulfilling the mitzvah, then maybe let's reverse it. Let's take something that's not matzah without taste, might be taste without matzah, and that would be actually the mun. We did the mun, which would taste like matzah, but it's not actual matzah, a very well-discussed topic. So I use that Minchas Chinuch again as a springboard to talk about mun, which gets into many, many other factors as well, because mun chametz, mun matzah, and all types of stuff. I actually had a wild one that I have a friend of mine who wrote an entire sefer on mun. And he told me he never saw this question. But, there's the famous question by matzah that it requires ownership. One must own the matzah that he's using, which maybe we'll talk about later, in order to fulfill the mitzvah. And the question is, did people own mun? What's the level of ownership? There's an atziv and a tesefta that says that when it comes to mun, they did not have full rights to do what they want. They needed to eat the mun. La'achla, it says in the pasuk, which meant la'achla v'lo l'schaira. If someone owns something without actually being allowed to do anything with it, but only limited to one idea, it's, let's say, eating it, he's only allowed to eat it, would that be called proper ownership? If it would not be called proper ownership, then the whole mun question is off the table, because you needed ownership when it comes to matzah, and mun doesn't have official ownership based on the fact that you couldn't sell it. So I use that as a springboard, and again, hopefully the audience, most of the feedback overall has been very, very positive.
So you talked about the ownership there. So let's talk about ownership in the context of the mun. Talk about the ownership of matzah. Lochem.
Right. So it is interesting that it's famous, I think, today on some level. Again, the word famous is an odd word. It's famous on some level today that the people, they make it by guests. They make it a big thing that the guests are required to own the matzah, which means if A goes to B's house as a guest and B gives A matzah, he's not giving ownership necessarily of the matzah to A. He's serving him his food at the table. Does A have to make an official kinyan, an official requirement to do it? And a lot of houses, they lift up the matzah thing. They have it. He quotes Rav Truvas and Huggis quotes Rav Blazer Silva every year in the Shabbos Haggadah Drasha, quoted that he was in Dvinsk by both the R and the Ragat Shava. They were very strict about this, and they made all the guests lift up the matzah one tafach to acquire the matzah to fulfill the mitzvah. And the Minchas Chinuch actually predates a lot of the people discuss it, not all of them, and he discusses it by slaves. He says that women are mechuyev matzah, and he jumps over women and says, "What about slaves? Slaves in our Jewish law never acquire anything, right? The yad ever ki yad balabais. He never owns anything. So how could a slave openly, which it says he's obligated in the mitzvah, ever fulfill the mitzvah?" So the Minchas Chinuch is discussing it by slaves. So I will then take that question to Minchas Chinuch and say, "Wait a second, why did he not discuss it by women?" He mentions women. In Jewish law, the women won't like this, but in Jewish law, we know women don't really have the ability to acquire things as well. The yad yishak yad bala. So could the average female who's obligated in matzah, how does she fulfill the mitzvah if she doesn't own the matzah? So Minchas Chinuch did not discuss it. He skipped over. He mentions women, but uses women as this. Okay. So fascinatingly, the Minchas Chinuch actually says that women are obligated in matzah, and then says because women are obligated in matzah, we automatically know that slaves are obligated, since all the obligations that women have, the non-Jewish slave possessed by a Jewish owner has as well. The Minchas Chinuch asks the question, wait a second, if slaves cannot possess items, then how do slaves ever become to the level where they can fulfill the mitzvah? They don't own the matzah at all. What I do is I go back a step and say, wait a second, Rabbi Minchas Chinuch, you mentioned women, and we know women are obligated, but why don't you ask that question as well? Women themselves have a questionable ability of what they could acquire, because we know yad yishak yad bala. So the same way the Minchas Chinuch asked it on slaves, we're going to now ask it on women. We're going to try to explain why the Minchas Chinuch would not find that as a question, and then we extend it to other people who are at the table. So you have a regular guest at the table. The Sfas Emes made famous, and as I told you, the Blazer Silva made famous, and then you go on to the next level. Of we bring down, if you have to own it, that's a wilder piece that a couple of Rabbanim told me they used in their Shabbos Haggadah Drasha. The Gemara says that if someone does not make a bracha rishayna, he does not acquire the item. That's Gemara in brachas. So the Shlomo Kluger has a question that if someone did not make the bracha on matzah before eating the matzah, since the Gemara says he does not acquire the food, would he also be missing in the lechem for the mitzvah of matzah? So I use that as another springboard for another chapter as well. If someone forgot the bracha rishayna on the mitzvah of matzah, can he fulfill the mitzvah, or does he lack what we call full ownership, lack lachem, because someone who does not make a bracha does not have ownership according to the Gemara in brachas lamed hey? And that itself is not my own question. Rav Shlomo Kluger's statement, and then a lot of people after were discussing if Rav Shlomo Kluger is right or wrong, up until even the Kloisenberger Rav recently. So again, try to take a what I would say, in my view, I'm the one authoring it, so I get to decide. I think these are unique, interesting questions that create conversations that people can enjoy. I try to break it down to where the questions and answers are easy and the Gemaras make sense and the other ideas are brought in and a person can enjoy it and walk into shul and sound intelligent by saying it over. Not a problem at all. If someone was still in the original Minchas Chinuch Torah, someone can certainly steal my version of the Minchas Chinuch Torah. Without a problem, it's been done for 150 years in Klal Yisrael, and it should continue. It's all fine by me.
So I want to ask you about the Rav Shlomo Kluger and talking about the woman owning the matzah. So both of those,
that's two different things.
No, there's two different things. But what I want to clarify is, each of those chapters it says addendum in a box. Is that because it's not the actual Minchas Chinuch? Is that why you do that on certain prakim? It says addendum.
Right. So usually what I try to do is I try to break it down as you see the sidebars as well. So if it's a long piece that's not exactly the Minchas Chinuch, I'll go to a chapter after the one we're discussing, make it a new chapter, and entitle it either addendum or appendix, depends how many are in each chapter. And within the chapter itself, sometimes it's just directly important, but I don't want someone getting lost in the details. So I'll put it in a sidebar, and the person could skip over the sidebar and read the chapter and fully grasp what's going on, or he could take a detour, or at the end of the chapter come back to the sidebar and see, there's something interesting on this detail here that we got to figure out. Does that original detail make sense? So it's a little difficult how to decide what goes where, and that's part of the process. And hopefully I get that right most of the time.
So you mentioned
addendums are like that.
Now you mentioned a sidebar. The sidebar are kind of these, I call it the gray article box, so that the listeners can visualize what it is. Those gray boxes. You have those throughout the chapters. What is that? Why are those there?
So the sidebars usually is like, let's say, for an example, let's say we're discussing the women owning stuff. So as I would say, do married women have the right to own property in Jewish law? And I'm discussing that based on the general concept of the chapter. If women do not have the right to own their matzah, are they now missing something in their ownership? Therefore, that would not help them fulfill, would be a detriment to them fulfilling the mitzvah. Within that, sometimes there'll be an argument, a minor detail that, by the way, this Gemara seems to say there's a contradiction in Rashi. So instead of it ruins the flow of the conversation, I'll just put in a sidebar that, by the way, check out this conversation. There's a contradiction in the Rashi necessarily. You want to look at it, but let's go back to what we're discussing. So it's more like I call it a sidebar, like it's on the side, it's there, it's important, but it's not as equally, important to this conversation, this present second that we're discussing it. So it's there for the viewer to decide how much of it they want to go through. And I did the bibliography. I quote a lot of in the volumes here. I did a lot of it in Hebrew on bottom, if you notice. Some of the Svarim I quote are not so accessible. Sometimes I figure the original Hebrew, as you asked me, why don't you write this in Hebrew? Sometimes the original Hebrew is better than my English, and therefore on the bottom I put the footnotes. I will put, if I'm quoting Sefer X, I will put Sefer X's exact words. The bottom is almost always, I would say 95%. Sometimes I'll add to it, but very rarely. It's really the exact words of the original Sefer. So to make it easier for the reader if they enjoy Hebrew more. And sometimes after they read my English, they'll read the Hebrew and appreciate it. Sometimes they won't. The first time will be a little difficult, but after they read the English, they'll appreciate it as well. And again, all to make it easier for the viewer. I'm trying to make it accessible for people, not for me myself. So I'll do the sidebars, I'll do the addendums. If you notice, I break up, I don't know what you'd call them, every couple paragraphs, I break it up and I have a section break, all to try to make it easier. And, that people should realize what's going on. I put a lot of graphics in there, a lot of charts. I think this volume has more charts than last time, even as like a summary, if people like the visuals a little better. And, everyone thinks differently. So some people like charts, some people hate charts. Some people like the sidebars, some people don't. Most people like the Hebrew. And my English audience, many people tell me they are not at the level to read the Hebrew on the bottom. But that's fine. That's there, for some people, trying to make everyone happy a little bit. And then, everyone can pick out what they want. Not every chapter is gonna agree with every person there. Like some people might not like the idea. It'll be a little too nitty gritty. Can we nullify matzah? And we have 80% real matzah and 20% fake matzah. Is that good enough for the Seder? Some people find that a little nitty gritty. They skip that paragraph, skip that chapter. But I think within the book, within the Sefer, I think 60, 70% of each volume should be appreciated by almost anybody. Anybody should come to 60%. And then again, in the back, I quote a lot of Svarim there. So in the back, I write a little history of who they are, when they was published. That's about 25 pages itself. But some of the Svarim are more famous, but some are not so famous. I think each volume already, as we said, what I'm using as a launching. So each volume probably has 200 plus other svarim that I'm quoting. And some are more famous and some are less famous. We had actually a very wild story, just because I think it's entertaining. I have a brother-in-law who would not want his name mentioned, but I know you know him, who's a world famous expert on svarim, and I usually call him. A lot of times I want to know about a sefer. What do you know about, let's say, Divrei Nachi? Do you know Divrei Nachi? And Baruch Hashem, he has a big library and extremely knowledgeable. And on this volume about to come out, I'm quoting someone, Reb Mordechai. In Yiddish, it's Kletschka. I think it became Klatsko in English now. He's about 100 years ago in America. And I forgot the name of the sefer for a second. So I called my brother and I said, listen, Mordechai Kletschko, what was the name of his sefer again? And this is probably one of the most unique responses I ever got. Mordechai Kletschko, there's two of them. And by the way, both of them wrote a sefer called Teres Mordechai. That was the first that I ever had out of that response. So I had to then find out which Mordechai Kletschko I was referring to. And one of them is Mordechai Kletschko, one's Mordechai Kletschko in the front of the sefer, Mechuna Meltzer, which is what my brother said to me at the time. There's two Mordechai Kletschkos, one's Mechuna Meltzer, and they both wrote Teres Mordechai. So in the back, when I'm quoting the Teres Mordechai, I will give a little biography. Okay, that's obviously more important to know which Mordechai Kletschko it is. If anyone realizes that there might be two of them, I'm not sure if 15 people alive realize that there's two Mordechai Kletschkos with both the same name and the same for Teres Mordechai. But sometimes in the back, people find interesting things. I have a friend of mine who's a Rav. He told me he goes right to the back. He said, before I read any of the Sfar, any of the Lumdis, I go right to the back. I want to see who you're quoting and how many of the Sfar I know and what I know about them. And, that's fine by me. It's all good.
It's really,
thank God. It's, Baruch Hashem.
It's really nice in the back. First of all, also something else is by each one of these farm, it has in parentheses. So you can say the name of the sefer in italics, and then in parentheses you have the page number where it's quoted in the sefer, and then you write down. Some of them you just write when they lived, the years. Some you write, if it's the name of a journal, you say who it is, and then some of them you actually give a nice little biography. So it's very nice. It's a little bit more than kind of your regular. Now, getting back to a few more things on matzah before we move on. You have and if you want to mention, you have a chapter on cheap matzah, pachas shavapruta. And then you also have about kavana on matzah.
Excellent. So on cheap matzah, that is a lot of times the Minchas Chinuch himself. It's hard to know exactly how he wrote the sefer. Clearly, was different versions at times. He was doing different things. That's why sometimes the Minchas Chinuch can be repeated in 5 places, and there'll be one time he'll quote a certain Gemara, one time he won't. So I try to gather every time he's discussing a certain topic. This cheap matzah thing is actually something he discusses in several mitzvahs. There is a concept going back to what we discussed before of lechem, ownership. In order to have ownership of something, there are certain requirements. You have to lift it up to possess it. You might have to have your own hand. You can't be maybe a married woman, maybe a slave can't. And the Gemara, in relevance to sukkah, seems to say that in order to acquire a sukkah, someone has to have the value. If there's 45 partners in the sukkah, then the sukkah would have to be worth 45 prutas. If there are 10,000 people who own a sukkah, would have to have 10,000 prutas. Each person would be required. In order to have what's called ownership in an item, you would need a value of a pruta for all of the partners involved. And the Minchas Chinuch, which I think the audience will have a good laugh about, in more than one place, in Matzah, in Hadassim, Aravis, Lulav, I think even in Esrig, he says, wait a second, if in order to have Lachem and all these mitzvahs, in order to fulfill the mitzvah, you need to acquire the item, you need possession, you need to be an owner of the item. That means you have to have the value of a Shava Pruta, which is really, I don't know what a Shava Pruta will be today, a penny and a half or something. And he writes that in his time, imagine this in Galicia, in his time, he said there's no such thing as Aravis and Adassim being worth a Pruta. They're always less than a Pruta. He says matzahs, who buys matzah for a Pruta? I don't know what they're charging these days in America, about $38 a pound. That is definitely more than a pruta per matzah. But it seems to be that in the 1800s in Galicia, matzahs were less than a pruta. If we can go back to Altaheim, that would be something worth gathering. And the Minchas Chinuch discussed this. Wait a second. We don't have a pruta. How is someone going to fulfill the mitzvah? And by the way, he stays with that. He doesn't change the answer and says, wait a second, no, really matzah is worth really $38 a pound. He doesn't do that. He says matzah is not worth a pruta. Imagine that. A full matzah, not worth a penny and a half. And he discussed this potentially, and other people quote, this is a very famous Minchas Chinuch. A lot of people discuss it. The basic answer for the audience would be that when there's a partnership involved, then each one needs to have a pruta. But when someone is a sole owner, then the pruta requirement is unnecessary. You are the owner. It's only when you're sharing your ownership would you need to have a pruta. So if you shared matzah ownership, doesn't really exist, then you'd have to have matzah that each partner would need a pruta value. Again, we cover that on the $38. But that's again, so that's a Minchas Chinuch that I don't know if it would speak to a lot of people, because I think most people would wish we can get to matzah being less than a pruta, and we'll deal with that problem when it comes up. I think most people would sign up for that deal tomorrow. I don't even know. I mean, think of the cheapest machine matzah, shipped in from middle of Ukraine. It's still going to be more than a penny. I mean, but again, we'll go back to that in practicality. But Minchas Chinuch and other, I mean, Menachem Zema talks about that. That's a topic that the Minchas Chinuch discusses. Ownership. The Beis Yitzchak discusses it. Ownership requirement. You need a pruta. Does it only apply by sukkah? Maybe the sukkah ownership is different. And why would it not apply again to matzah, aravas, hadassim? Imagine getting a set of lulav, esrog, hadassim, and aravas for under a penny in Galicia in 1850. That would be something worth time traveling back to if we could figure that one out. And that's a good one, Baruch Hashem. The intent one you asked about intent. It's more I think the second part of it, because obviously Maror is not one of the 613 mitzvahs. Maror is a rabbinic mitzvah, does not make the 613 cut, but it's tied into matzah, it's tied into Korban Pesach. And, I have already all the mitzvahs of Korban Pesach written up. Eventually, hopefully, I'll put it out maybe next year, maybe the year after. We'll see if funding comes through. I have a bunch of the mitzvahs written up already. But intent is interesting because the fact is, when you're eating maror, what's going on here? You nobody likes the taste of maror. So on some level, when you're eating it, are you missing something what's called acquired taste? And therefore, the Minchas Chinuch discusses what level of maror bitterness is required. If you hold this extremely bitterness to a level that's not called food, then you could be missing other areas as well. And it'll become a question. What happens with these parameters of maror if it's too bitter? Again, if it's only a little bit sour, if you left it out, if you cut up the horseradish and opened up the jar before the Seder started, you went on for 2 hours, I think you could eat the horseradish and consider it regular food. But if you take it, if you're biting into that item and it's where your eyeballs are popping out and you're about to, coughing up, it's a question if that's even called eating. The Minchas Chinuch goes into it. Is maror at a certain level too bitter to be called a food? And again, will lead into other questions as well. So maror, even though I don't say it on the cover, you said yourself, it's matzah and it's CPT time. Maror is applicable a lot throughout the volume, again, because maror is tied into matzah, even though it's not a biblical mitzvah.
So this chapter of matzah, even though you said there's maror, and we mentioned you may discuss the man, discuss sukkah, whatever, a lot of things that come in, that's 200 pages. Now, there's another 45 pages on mitzvah, or it's a little less, but whatever, on mitzvah sipri siyas mitzrayim. So let's talk about it. You have nashim, you have woman, manishtana, the rabbanim that are Mesubah Bnei Brak, and more. So, what do you want to talk about on mitzvah sipri?
So the Minchas Chinuch himself. That's again again, I keep on saying the word famous Minchas Chinuch. There are probably endless amounts of famous Minchas Chinuch, and the proof is because there's literally every sefer in the world is quoting a Minchas Chinuch today. But the Sefer HaChinuch, that's the original, to differentiate between the Sefer HaChinuch anonymously printed in the 1300s. He writes that women are obligated in Sibri time, the mitzvah, to retell the story of the Exodus. And that's Sefer HaChinuch is openly stated. The Minchas Chinuch will begin with the obvious question. Wait a second, we normally say that positive time-bound commandments, women are not obligated. Women are not obligated to anything. They're not obligated to shake a lulav. They can shake a lulav, but they're not obligated to. So wait a second, why? Minchas Chinuch asks, why would the Sefer HaChinuch, let's question what the Rambam rules, why would the Sefer HaChinuch say that women are obligated in Sipet Yitzrayim on Pesach night? Wait, they're not. That's a time-bound positive mitzvah. That comes around once a year. There's obviously a big debate. That will be the next Minchas Chinuch, if there's really an every night mitzvah. But even that would be considered a time-bound. It would only be night, not the day. So here you have a mitzvah that's considered technically time-bound, and the Sefer HaChinuch writes that women are obligated. And he would go through several, I quote many others as well. What would be the reason, what would be the makar that women, if we accept the Sefer HaChinuch, what would be the makar that women are obligated? As I will tell you that Rav Prager, Rav Yaakov Prager, the son-in-law of Ram Shik, if I remember offhand, he writes that women are not mechuyev in Sibet Yitzrayim. And if you want to tell the women to take the kids into bed and they don't want to stick around, they again how long you've been obligated the mitzvah for, but it could be women are not obligated. It's a regular standard time-bound positive commandment, and they would be potter. I don't think that's what 99% of the people rule, but he seems to rule that way. So in the Sefer HaChinuch, we have a Minchas Chinuch on Sibet Yitzrayim. Are women obligated? He has a very famous question as well. What about Shemei Kaina? Two people are by a Seder. Both have an obligation of Vegadat Levincha. What would they do? Would both be obligated? Let's say a father and grandfather. He talks about it from Australia. He has a whole thing on it. Let's say a father and grandfather are at the table. Who's talking to the grandchild? Is the father talking? Is the grandfather talking? Could one fulfill his obligation by listening to the Haggadah as opposed to telling over the Haggadah? So the Minchas Chinuch touches on a few basic points there. And again, that's, as you said, the Bnei Brak, they're sitting with Super Bnei Brak. How long is the mitzvah for? Does it go till Chatzos, or does it go the whole night? The second part, you're saying, is about 50 pages. I don't remember exactly. Sibet Yitzrayim, parts of it are a little difficult, because why is Sibet Yisrael considered one mitzvah, two mitzvahs, the nightly mitzvah versus the yearly, once a year mitzvah. So part of that, again, I would use the word nitty gritty, and part of it is very easy. Are women obligated in the mitzvah? Is a very easy conversation. Is there a Shemaya Ka'ina? Very easy conversation. And again, the Minchas Chinuch discusses it, and we expound on what other people expound on what he says. And that was also a pretty good one. Thank God. Baruch Hashem.
So the new volume, you already mentioned Tashbisu in the beginning. What about other inyanim, about chametz?
Right. So the new volume in Mitzvah, it's already by the printer, and Baruch Hashem, it's going to be out. I think by the time I don't know when you're hearing this. It could be by the time you're hearing it, it will be out already. That's what I'm hearing. And this new volume will cover 6 mitzvahs of chametz. The chametz has the tashbisu, that's a positive mitzvah. Then there's bal yirah by matzah, the 2 prohibitions of not owning it. And then achilas chametz is divided by 3. Actually, again, these are biblical level mitzvahs. There's achilas chametz during Pesach. That's an obvious isser. There's achilas chametz erev Pesach, which is not necessarily kares, but again, a biblical commandment. And as well, the achilas chametz of taruvas chametz. So it'll be 6 different mitzvahs that would include positive and negative relative to the mitzvahs of chametz on Pesach. I think an interesting thing I come up with, again, I springboard off the Minchas Chinuch, is that the Minchas Chinuch says that, of course, as soon as Pesach ends, you're allowed to eat chametz. That's obvious. And I use those 6 words that he uses to discuss, wait a second, what about before Havdalah? I never even knew this was a question until last year when I was working on this. And what about, which I tell everyone, can you eat technically chametz before you eat Havdalah? Which would mean you still Pesach for you. Can't do malacha because you didn't do Havdalah yet. Matzah Pesach. Imagine like on a regular Shabbos, you're allowed to eat. We don't do it, but you're allowed to eat shal shudas. If you start shal shudas early, you could technically continue eating until it gets dark. We're not knowing that way, but halachically speaking, you could technically eat once it's dark, even though you're not eating before Havdalah, but it doesn't make a difference. Once you start the meal early, you'd be permitted to eat. What about a guy who the last day of Pesach starts a meal 3.5 hours before the Zman ends, and he's doing a long mi'ilas and chag, and now that it becomes nighttime outside, and there's singing and dancing, and everyone's still involved with the meal, but for Havdalah, but it's dark outside. Can you eat chametz at that moment in time? So the Minchas Chinuch really does not discuss this. He just says you can eat chametz immediately, and I decided what the word immediately really means. Does the word immediately mean even before Havdalah, or the Minchas Chinuch is referring to post Havdalah? And by the way, this question is a controversial question on the Mishnah Berurah, what he really rules. Shlomo Zalman talks about it in the Shmir Shabbos and another place. It becomes a big question again. So I'm using it as a springboard from the Minchas Chinuch's one word, and it creates a lot of entertaining conversations. The last night of Pesach, everyone's sitting around Nils Chag, and it gets dark, and one guy has the guts to get up and eat a pizza pie before Havdalah. I wouldn't recommend it, obviously, but it's a possibility to create some interesting conversations.
What about something else? Something else in the new volume. Obviously, I don't have it in front of me, like I have the last year's volume, because, like you said, when we're recording this, it's not out yet. So, what about Shechiyanu? Other things that you discuss?
Oh, so Shechiyanu, like I said, I took one paragraph and of the Minchas Chinuch, one of the, again, a packed-in paragraph of the Minchas Chinuch. It's Mitzvah Shin, Mitzvah 300, and he discusses there's a concept by Sukkah. Rav Kahana rules that if somebody, he holds obligated to make a Shechiyanu when you build a Sukkah, but he delays the Shechiyanu until the first night of Yom Tov to have it on a cup of wine, on Kiddush by the wine by the Sukkah. So that's what we do. We make Kiddush Sukkah night, and we include in our Shechiyanu the mitzvah of Sukkah, of the Yom Tov of Sukkahs, and the mitzvah of building the Sukkah as well. So the Minchas Chinuch has a very extensive, again, I only say one paragraph. Extensive means it turned into 50 pages, because a lot of the boys looking at it. What about on Pesach? Let's say for some reason, some guy somehow forgot to say the Shechiyanu by the Seder night. Would he make the Shechiyanu? He owes the Shechiyanu. The mitzvah of Shechiyanu is really based on the arrival of a new holiday. Would he be obligated to say the Shechiyanu as soon as he remembers, day one, and that night, the next day, and shul, whatever it is? Or we'd know, let's wait for another cup of wine, which would be the last days of Pesach. If, let's say a guy remembers on Chol Hamoed that for some reason, the first 2 days of Yom Tov, he wasn't looking at a siddur, he forgot the bracha Shechiyanu. Would he have to wait now on the second day of Chol Hamoed for the last days of Pesach to then make the Shechiyanu, just like Rav Kahana waited from the building of the Sukkah 3 days before Yom Tov till the first night of Sukkah to have it with a cup of wine? Would the person as well be obligated to wait from the third day of second day of Chol Hamoed till second day's Yom Tov and make the Shechiyanu together with Kiddush to have it over a cup of wine? And that question by the Minchas Chinuch again turns into about 30 pages, because a lot of people discuss the pros and cons of doing such a thing of waiting until then and not. And that's 30 pages. But again, I think it's entertaining. I actually, I've given some of this stuff in my shiurim, and usually when I'm giving it as a shiur, it's easier to listen to. It's easier to listen than to read it, but usually most of the crowd gets into it. They fire back questions and answers, and it works out well. I mean, people get entertained by it, and Baruch Hashem, all good.
So the first volume of Pesach is about 244 pages of actual, Minchas Chinuch and your, adaptation, whatever content, besides for the introduction, the history background, and that's besides for the in the back, the index where you give like the history of this farm, etc. How big is the new volume that's out this year?
Nearly identical. Nearly identical. Probably about. I redid the history again because it's not really as a set yet. So I redid the history. I modified it. I added some things. I took out some things that I wasn't sure I should keep it anymore. And the actual sefer is probably at one point, through typesetting. I'm doing it with Ali Zayas, and I have an interesting thing throughout my svarm. And all my svarm, my Hebrew ones, my English ones, I've had a tremendous run of oddball schoolers. I don't know. I hate to say it, oddball, but last year's volume, I think 9 people who gave me money found Zivugim right away. 3 of them the next day. 3 people who gave me money the next day, they found the shidduch. I have names and numbers. It's an odd thing, but Shemanos, who I'm using for Ali Zayas, he told me that if I say the name Shemanos 3 times, which I've just done, then it's an automatic school for something as well. I'm not sure what the school is for, but he says that it does work for something. And how do I just get into this right now? Oh, so at one point, when Shemanos sent me back the original, that will be the 4th time, he'll have to deduct some of the payments he's charging me. The original typeset version came out. It was actually the exact amount of pages, but then we move stuff. Then we become nitty gritty, and we add here, we minus this. There's a type of mistake here. There's a graph missing. There's a lot of graphs, and but it's not the exact amount of pages. But again, roughly the same amount of pages. Probably 250, 260 content-based pages. I think the introduction is a PhD master thesis on the life of the Minchas Chinuch, but that's not what we're calling the content itself. And then there's an introduction, and then there's the thank yous, and then there's the bibliography in the back, which is about 20 pages. And then a few zechanismuses and a few people. I had one person last year who gave me really very little money, but for him a lot of money, and he found the zivug the next day. And this year he called me, he knew I'm doing it, and he offered me 10 times the price. He said, "I owe you shadchanas." And Baruch Hashem, that's if that can get the rest of the volumes published. I have many more ready to publish. If that's how it does it through schools, I don't think it's me at all. By the way, it's obvious I'm quoting. If you're looking in the back on the bibliography, probably depending on the person, you're obviously more knowledgeable than the average person, but probably the average person, I think, I'm going to be nice and say, would know 60% of the farm. That's being extremely nice, I have to say that. But a lot of people would even Yedea's farm would have definitely some farm there who have not been quoted in a while, and Baruch Hashem, those Machabrim are looking out for all of us. And that should be a school of everybody. Hope so. Hope for me, myself as well.
You also have, at least in the first time, a few ha'aras in Hebrew from Shalom Spitz as well.
Right. So officially, I learned Shara Torah for a while, and his father, in the Machon Shleim version, is thanked for giving over his notes. He was among the many. If you look at the beginning of almost, the Minchas Chinuch is a sefer that itself is studied by itself. That means, you're not picking up a Chazanish and starting to read a Chazanish. That would be very difficult to do. There are a few from the history of Klal Yisrael that became shiurim in this, the Arachaim HaKadosh, let's say. Arachaim HaKadosh, people sit down every week on Arachaim HaKadosh. People, for generations, have been having shiurim in the Minchas Chinuch. Of Kaifman from Gateshead, right before he passed away, he had just finished the Machzor. Rav Hershkowitz, it's endless. Obviously, every person has written on it. Rav Chaim Kanievsky, they all wrote about it. So Rav Spitz's father, who I give a non-shout out because I'm not saying his name, but someone named Brut, maybe his grandfather is the same person, who he was active and he gave a lot of his handwritten notes to Machon Shleim of Mar Mekaymis and stuff like that. So I knew that the family was also into the Minchas Chinuch and shtickle. And I asked him, and he told me that he had a piece written up, and he gave me a few pages. On the tonight, I'm not advertising it, so I'm not advertising it. You brought it up, not me. So just in case he listens to this, which is almost 99% chance he will not be listening. I don't think he even knows how to work a computer or a podcast. But I did not bring him up first. But Mechil's covered to Rebbe. I'm just mentioning Derech Agav what's going on, because yes, he gave me his shtickle Torah on Grada, what we discussed before, on women being obligated in the mitzvah of Sibet Yisrael, which is again a very discussed topic by a lot of people. Why they would be obligated if it's mitzvahs asay that has Tali in Zman. And Baruch, this volume, just to clear up, so I make myself less, I called him again for this volume, and he did not give me a piece. He had a piece on one of his term in the Torah is you're not allowed to slaughter this Pesach sacrifice with chametz in your possession. That is not in this volume, because that's really a carbon Pesach for the next volume. And he had a shtickle Torah that he offered to give me, but I didn't think it would be fair, because that would be mitzvah in the next volume as well. The carbon Pesach itself has about 10, 12 mitzvahs. And again, I don't know if that'll be one volume or 2 volumes. It's all mostly written up already, as well as other mitzvahs that I told you, Puravu, Tshuva, whatever. In Mitzvah Hashem, all of them will reach the wider viewing English audience, and that will be great. And if it works on schoolers, we'll stop the shidduch crisis.
So yeah, exactly. So as you just said, though, you said you want to reach the wider, English reading audience. Who are you aiming the sefer towards? Because now it's Lumdis, it's the Minchas Chinuch, it's your expanded version, your own Torah. Who are you expecting is going to pick up the sefer and gonna what are you aiming this, and what do you want them to get out of it?
Very good. Officially, I say there's very little of my own Torah in there. That's my official statement. It's more of a likut. But I think, again, so it reaches a lot of people. I have students. I teach in a high school. I've taught in a couple of high schools. I've sent it over to them, and most of them get very excited when they hear it. Again, outside, it's easier than reading sometimes, but you're sitting back and having someone else explain it. But the fact is, most of the high school kids really, really, really enjoy this stuff. Now, again, I've given them some Minchas Chinuch paradoxes, and that's just like mind-blowing. So it gets them into it. I think most people who were in yeshiva at one point, and now they're no longer in yeshiva. They're not going to have the time, the patience, again, I don't use knowledge, but really that's the correct word, knowledge of where to find all the Maramakamis to put together what we'll call, let's say, a series of chaburas, because they're busy. But again, as proven from Bornstein, who you said sponsored an episode, people want, they're past the bare minimum. They're past the basics, and they want the more in depth. They appreciate it, and they all can. I have friends of mine who in yeshiva for 5-7 years in Kollel. They told me they can't put it down. They're based on the breaking of the paragraphs, things they wouldn't have got to otherwise, things they wouldn't have thought of, and just the people in general who even did not go to yeshiva and they're not picking up any Hebrew skills. They're not going to appreciate the bottom, but they will definitely. I've had. I don't like to use the word Bali Tshuva because I think it's the way it's coming out in this conversation might sound a little offensive, but I have several Bali Tshuva who told me that they're not reading a Minchas Chinuch. They're having a hard time enough with the Gemara, and they go crazy over this. There's nothing. Again, I don't. You'll know maybe more than me. There's nothing out there similar of what's called real English lumdus. A friend of mine always says it's not a book; it's a real sefer. Happens to be in English. I think the closest one is the original. If you remember, I know it's Rav Zevin stuff in English. I don't know. They had the Mayad Ba'alacha. I don't know if you remember that. That's an age thing. I'm older than you. That was like a bar mitzvah gift when I was younger. Festivals and halacha, and that's I don't know why else will never reprinted it. Maybe that's the proof because they think the world doesn't want the lumdus of it. But there's very few real sink your teeth into high school kids, postgraduates. I have students of mine in Princeton. I'm giving him a shout out. He'll know I'm referring to him, who loves it and sends me questions on it because he could read the Hebrew too. He won't read it, insinuating otherwise. But the fact is, it has the audience. There's a lot of English-speaking people out there that if they saw the Hebrew world has a geschmack from the Minchas Chinuch, that the geschmack out of the Minchas Chinuch just exists. It's on every base medrash. Everyone loves the Minchas Chinuch. Everyone loves the good Minchas Chinuch. It's not fair that the wider English-speaking audience doesn't get that geschmack in Torah. So it's almost not fair to them. And here we're giving them a chance. We're giving them a chance to really see what the Simchas Torah is all about. It's great. And if you look at the back of it, the book, I quote some statements people said about the Minchas Chinuch, and there you have it. The Belzer dynasty believes that it's a school for clarity of thought. Not my version, the original version. And again, there is a lot to all the Gedolim. They say Reb Chaim Soloveitchik said you couldn't learn a Gemara without it. And I think someone brings down that the Minchas Chinuch is the most. Reb Chaim, if everyone knows, does not quote a lot of Achronim. I think he quotes it twice once. Someone told me, and the Stevens once. He quotes Minchas Chinuch twice. It's a go-to in the Lumdische world, and let's get the English world to appreciate this stuff. English-speaking, English-reading audience.
Okay, so how can someone purchase a sefer?
So it was I think Aldi Zayas also sells. I'm not sure. I went through Menucha distribution. And Menucha, last year we got it very late. This year we'll have both. Menucha, clearly, all the basic stores are supposed to get it. If not, the Menucha website itself. I'm not sure if the Ali Zayas website puts it up as well. I have a website. I don't know if I don't run. I do nothing with that website. It's rabbihubner.com. It's really all of my shiurim edited out, thankfully, because some of the stuff I say we would not want to the wider audience. As my joke always, it's not about me getting fired. It's about me getting arrested. So we cut out a lot of the things that shouldn't be on the audience. And maybe on there I'll try to sell it as well. But I think this year, if it comes in when they say it's coming in firm time, and Menucha gets it out to all the stores, I think all the stores will have it within a week or two after Purim. That's what I'm hoping for. And again, Pesach itself, our friends Alaska, I'll give them a shout out. Our friends Alaska told me that people like to buy Agadas every single year, and they get they love the Agadas, but after the first 2 days they don't want Haggadah Torah, they want something else. So this could be that something else for the other several days that they have available on a lot of free time.
That's good. I'll tell Avram that I got a first shout out on the podcast. That I listen to the podcast really, but I'll tell him I got a shout out. So
don't tell him when. I'll make him listen to the entire thing.
So I'll link the book. I'll link it, the book, the Sefer, and the show's notes. I'll find the link online. What are you working on next? What's the next plan, the volume?
Well, I was going to put out again about 15 volumes in general. I think I still have more Hebrew volumes than English volumes out. I still, Baruch Hashem, have done that. I did a Sefer on Rus in Hebrew. But right now, so you're talking about specifically for the Minchas Chinuch or in general? Specifically Minchas Chinuch right now, I'm between a few. I have a lot of, again, Carbon Pesach is basically done already. I don't know if I'm ready to saturate myself, the market, with matzah, then chametz, and then Carbon Pesach back to back to back. I'm not sure. I might switch over to Yom Neroyim or Tshuva or Puravu. I have a few. And then I have a general, which I don't think I'll ever land out doing. Like you asked me how this started. When it first started, I was just writing up the basic Minchas Chinuch, the cute clairs, and one or two varts on it. I probably have 3 volumes on that. But I think now the in-depth process is the way to go. But we'll see. Mitchum, there will be more. Hope that, that's the plan. If it's all Minash Shemaim, as we all know, but hopefully, I didn't think I'd get this far. But last year, what happened was that I'm not going to say all the details of the story, but there were 2 people who said that they knew about my again, I use the word school up. It's not my official school, but it just seems to work. They knew that my books have my Svarim have a tendency to get people engaged, and 2 people stepped up and they each paid about half of it. One of them, she gets a big thank you in the book, and she knows her name is there. That she gave me money of a few $1,000s actually, but that's not required, and for a specific person who met the person the day after she gave me the money, and the second person as well. So that sped up the process for last year's volume, which sped up the process to get this year's volume out. So hopefully, we can do more. It's a lot. Takes work, takes time, takes money, but Mirz Hashem plans it.
Okay. It sounds good, and I guess I don't know if you mentioned. So if anyone's interested in reaching out to you, you mentioned the school is associated with this. Can anyone you mentioned any contact information? Can anyone reach out to you if they're interested?
I think the contact information is actually I as I say, what's the old commercial? Past performance does not promise future results. But I take no credit for the school myself. But yes, it seems to be an odd thing. Last year's again produced. I think I'm at 9. Everyone, I always tell the people who gave me the money. I call them back after what happened. One person that wasn't about a shidduch, was about a health thing. He was going for a surgery, and he miraculously worked out well. I take zero credit, but I have a lot of star my quote. My information's probably in the Sefer. It's Hubner's at Gmail. I think is one of my websites. I don't know if the website even has a. I don't run the website at all. Someone else does. I think someone could reach out to the website as well. RabbiHubner.com. I'm not sure. He has a YouTube channel. I don't. I sadly to say I'll give Chaskel a shout out because really I do nothing for it. He does all the work, and he does not get paid for it. He does not get any thanks for it. And all he asks me every once in a while is, please do me a favor, tell people about it. I don't do that either too often, but I guess now on the Svarim chatter, that'll be a big shout out that covers all his complaints on me for the last 8 months. I covered a Chaskel on this shout out in this Svarim chatter, and I think I'll tell him also that I gave him the shout out, and he has to wait to the end to hear it. I won't tell him when I said his name.
A bunch of shout outs at the end. People have listened all at the end. All right. So thank you, Rabbi Hubner, for joining me. And like I said, I'll
thank you. And again, we started with thanking the Ganavim. We thank the Ganavim. Imagine that the guys, Kairach gets, and Haman has kids in Bnei Brak because he caused a Kiddush Hashem. Imagine this Ganaf, what he created. Who knows how Hashem repaid him? Guys created an endless amount of terror from one Ganaf. Oh, I don't know if it was one. I don't know who it was. A lot of conspiracy theories on who that was. But Baruch Hashem, thank you. I thank you. I haven't done this. Everyone told me that you would make this very easy. I think you have.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you once again for joining me.